Sawyer, welcome to the SpaceX IPO
Hey
show.
guys, how you doing? Can you hear me well?
We've got
Yeah,
you well.
loud and
Super
clear.
excited. Yeah, loud and clear. Great to have you in here. It's like GigaCast back on its feet. Excited to chat here a little bit about what's happening with SpaceX. I want you to take us back for a moment to December. You tweeted the IPO confirmation and that exploded. What was happening on your end in that moment, and what were you thinking from that moment until today?
Yeah, I didn't expect SpaceX to go public for, really many years, to be honest. When I first invested a few years ago, I was thinking it'd be a 10-year long hold period until the IPO at least. But I think once data centers started becoming more common, and certainly orbital data centers became a larger part of the discussion, it became clear that they needed a lot of capital, and the private market just wasn't going to provide them that. And so I think the only avenue really for them was to go public and to be able to raise, however much money they wanted. And, they had a lot of competition from OpenAI and Anthropic, and so they needed to get moving. And I think ultimately, like before the valuation got too crazy, I think they wanted everyday retail investors to have a piece of this company, to be able to say, hey, you can have a direct piece of this company who has the most ambitious mission in human history. So I think that was part of it. But ultimately, they needed as much money as possible to get moving quickly, because Anthropic and OpenAI are not sitting still.
How many shares did you get filled for?
So I got, I think, like 2.9% of what I requested, so like a few dozen or something. Yeah, it was nothing. There's so much demand, over $100 billion worth of retail alone. I think it was over 5x subscribed in total. So like over $350 billion worth of demand, which is unheard of for an IPO.
Yeah, biggest IPO of all time. Kind of not a surprise when it comes to Elon. We are really curious to see, how this will perform out the gate, but I think that you're the type of person that's looking at it long term. You've been, I believe, nearly 100% Tesla for many years. You mentioned that you have been invested in SpaceX for a while, but that was as a private company. Now that it's going public, I'm just curious to understand, what is your split going to look like? Do you have a 50-50 in mind, or is it something different than that?
So Tesla has been the only public stock I've owned for the last roughly 7 years. I mean, there's been tiny holdings of other things, but not really material. I guess it really depends what the stock does on this day of trading and in the months to come, what that split is. I probably won't add a ton to my position, depending on unless the price goes down and there's an opportunity there. I'll probably just hold to what I have pre-IPO, and I'm not exactly sure when those shares will become unlocked, but I'll probably just hold those for years to come, unless the price were to get crazy. But I want to be a stockholder in this company for a long time.
Very cool,
Hey,
Tanner.
yeah, I just want to know, because I'm newer to the SpaceX, like understanding this company, and your account's been a major part of that, just watching the road shows that you've shared and all of these things. But how would you rank in importance for your investment thesis some of the different goals that SpaceX has? Because they're obviously going in a ton of different directions. So how should a new investor look at this company?
I think the orbital data center opportunity and the communication side via Starlink and Starlink Mobile are really the two pillars for me. I think long term people continue to underestimate the Starlink residential opportunity, but also like the Starlink Mobile opportunity is massive. I think a lot of people are so focused on the residential side, or maybe even the commercial side with airplanes and stuff, but the mobile opportunity is huge. I think by the end of this year, SpaceX wants to have like 25 million Starlink Mobile users worldwide. And this is before they even start to launch their version 2 Starlink Mobile satellites, which will start to launch in the middle of next year. They need to have Starship going for that. But that'll enable 5G speeds literally from space in the middle of nowhere. Um, and then the orbital data center opportunity, SpaceX is uniquely positioned for this. They got the launch capability. They have the technological know-how, because they already have 10,000 plus satellites in space, so they know what they're doing. I know a lot of people think it's some sort of physics problem or technological problem that SpaceX will have a hard time figuring out how to put GPUs and data centers in space, with the cooling and stuff, or the heat issues. But I have no problem. I mean, I have no doubt that SpaceX will figure that out. But there's no other launch provider that can send these things up. So if Anthropic and OpenAI and a lot of these other AI companies have trouble building these terrestrial-based data centers, which I suspect they will, because the political and local pushback of building terrestrial-based data centers is only growing. It's getting worse. And so really, I think the long-term solution, cost-wise and just for a level of ease, is going to be data centers in space. And really the only company that's going to be able to do that, send them up, is going to be through SpaceX. So they'll be the go-to launch provider for that. And it'll be interesting to see what happens.
I think a lot of people at first value don't fully realize how large the connectivity industry is. Some $1 trillion now. And for the longest time, it's kind of been tackled in the exact same way. You know, many of these companies share the same towers that like there's never been a differentiated product. Now the market, SpaceX is taking this in a completely different direction that really hasn't been done before. So do you think that this market actually grows in terms of the addressable market for connectivity, whether that is cell phone or residential or all these different areas?
Absolutely. I think Starlink is really going to become known as like the internet going forward, because I think everyone's going to have some sort of connection with Starlink, either whether it's through residential or mobile. I think everyone eventually will have access to it. And initially, Starlink was really known as just a connection service for rural areas that don't have much internet anyways. But now even people in more urban areas are starting to use it. Once the Starlink version 3 satellites start launching at the end of this year on Starship, that's going to enable a 20x improvement in bandwidth per satellite, which will vastly open up the capabilities of the system and will allow people to start using it in more densely populated areas, in more areas where people consider, wire-based systems as better. I think 12 million subscribers that they have now, Starlink is going to see impunity in the years to come.
And do you think that they're going to charge more for this, or they're going to be competitive on pricing? Like,
no, I think they want to bring pricing down. Yeah. I think as the capability gets better, their bandwidth improves, and they introduce more new users. I think they want to bring down that monthly cost. I mean, that's already started to happen. I think a few years ago, the average or revenue per user was like over $100. I think now it's about $66. So it's already started to come down.
wow. Okay. Okay.
I can jump in here for a second. Just bouncing off what we were talking about before. Maybe you could talk a little bit more about Terra Fab and bullish, what you think needs to change there, any of those pieces?
Yeah, Terra Fab is interesting because it's sort of one of those moonshot projects that, classic Elon, right? That could cost hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. I think SpaceX thinks that the entire Terra Fab could be upwards of 100 million square feet, which would be Giga Texas. Tesla's Giga Texas factory is a mile long and 10 million square feet. So theoretically, this thing would be many miles long of a building and 100 million square feet. It's just nuts. That's going to take many, many years to build, and hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars in investment. But I think that will enable them to use their own chips, their own design, bring down costs, and really fulfill the demand that they think they're going to have. They don't think that they can get enough chips from TSMC and Samsung and the other makers, Intel. So I think ultimately they just feel like they need to bring this thing in-house to be able to have the scale and put the chips into Optimus, the AI satellites, Starlink satellites, and everything else. I think Elon ultimately would rather not have to bring this in-house. I think that's how he feels most of the time.
Yeah.
But ultimately, he just was like, "There's no one else is going to do this, so we got to do it." That's what happened with the lithium refinery at Tesla. They didn't want to do that, but they're like, "Oh, no one else is going to do this. We need more lithium, so we'll just do it ourselves."
Yeah, that's a really good point. There's been a lot of times I feel like with Elon where he's like, no one seemingly is doing this the way that I want them to. So
yeah, that's
I
one thing I
know,
really appreciate about Elon is he's so good at hardware. Like he's really good at manufacturing. He knows more about manufacturing, I think, than anybody on Earth. And that's one thing I think Anthropic and OpenAI are going to struggle with as they scale is like they don't really know how to deploy data centers very quickly, whereas the SpaceX team, XAI team, does. And so that's going to be a key advantage, I think, for this SpaceX team.
I think that's going to be a huge advantage in every industry, right? Because as AI models start to crack human level capabilities, the software side is going to be, I think, a much easier problem. It's going to be the hardware side that's really going to differentiate two separate businesses, whether that's setting up data centers or, orbital data centers or something like this. The logistics, the understanding, like Elon just somehow has an understanding of how to speed up and accelerate deployments faster than any other human on Earth. Yeah. That being said, though, with SpaceX, I want to know what are the KPIs that I should be looking at as a new investor in this business, well, I currently am not an investor, but if I were to invest in this business, should I be looking at the amount of launches that are going up in space, the size of the payloads? Like, how do you measure this company if it's not just based on fundamentals, revenue, and net income?
A large portion of this company comes down, or the future potential of this company really comes down to Starship working. If they can get Starship working at a rapidly reusable rate, and they can start sending up huge payloads of next generation Starlink satellites and just other satellites, and moon-based missions and cargo missions, then that is a really huge unlock in terms of future total addressable markets. For example, so the next generation Starlink version 3 satellites, which will start launching later this year, about 10 Starship launches full of Starlink version 3 satellites will equal the amount of bandwidth that all 10,000 plus satellites that they have currently in space equals to. So I think that's 600 V3 satellites will equal 10,500 V2 and V1 Starlink satellites in terms of bandwidth capacity, which is pretty nuts. It'll carry over 100 tons in terms of cargo capacity, well above anything else on the market. And so really to be able to get the massive amounts of cargo to Mars and the moon, AI data centers in space, they've already submitted their filing to be able to get approval from the FCC for 1 million AI satellites in orbit around the Earth. If they can get that going, that'll be a huge unlock for the whole addressable market and just their valuation, I think, in general.
Can you speak a little bit more about the difficulties they're encountering to get that ship to be able to actually work?
Yeah, I think the hardest part is getting it rapidly reusable. And so to do that, you don't want to have to take a long time refurbishing it. They have to develop a heat shield, tiles on the Starship to be able to withstand.
The one that they let Mr. Beast bang into place?
Yep, exactly. They got to be able to withstand multiple reentries over a long period of time. And so it seems like in their last flight 12, I think it was, that they made good progress on that front. And they've been able to figure out how to re-land rockets, just the booster part. But the full Falcon 9 is not reusable. Starship fixes that. The entire thing is reusable. It's aimed to bring down launch costs massively, even from Falcon 9. I think actually an entire Starship launch will cost less than just an engine on the SLS or the NASA launch, which is pretty crazy. If they can figure out rapid reusability on Starship, which I think they will, they're making good progress on that, it'll open up a whole new industry. And I think with this IPO, the whole space industry is just going to become top of mind for a lot of people, and a huge unlock, I think, in terms of total addressable markets for not just SpaceX, but other companies and smaller companies as well.
So it's not just going to be SpaceX that might be a winner here. It's just the space industry in general. There's an inflection point happening.
Yeah. I think there'll be second order winners from this IPO. And I also, there are going to be a lot of people, there's going to be so much wealth generated from this IPO that people that invested in SpaceX long ago, or employees that maybe have already left, but still hold SpaceX shares. A lot of that wealth is going to be invested into new companies. If you go back to, they call it the PayPal mafia, a lot of the people in sort of Elon's orbit all got rich because of PayPal. And then they started to invest and create their own companies. I think YouTube was an offshoot. I think LinkedIn was an offshoot. There are a few other companies as well that became multi-billion dollar.
There's a few.
I think so. This SpaceX IPO will be that times 10. I think it'll just create a huge amount of companies and spread the wealth sort of everywhere to create whole new industries. It's going to be really cool to watch.
The millionaire cafeteria workers band together.
Yeah, the janitor.
It's crazy how many people are becoming so wealthy, right? Those have just stuck around and worked there for quite a while now. Their shares coming to fruition. I did have a question. I asked this to Jose beforehand, and I wanted to ask you as well, because you just tweeted about it 2 hours ago. This interview with SpaceX president Gwynne Shotwell about a potential merger with Tesla. I definitely wanted to get your thoughts on that. She talked about how it would just make Elon's life easier.
It would make Elon's life easier. Well, for one, he wouldn't have to do 8 earnings calls a year. I think he hates doing 8 earnings calls. But just having everything under one roof instead of having to figure out, okay, who gets what? There's so many synergies between the two companies already that I think it just makes sense to merge the two, especially with this collaboration on Terra Fab. It's supposed to be a SpaceX and Tesla project. And of course, with Optimus, they're going to be sending those on Starship, into Mars and the moon and whatnot. So I think for Elon, it would make a lot of sense to bring it under house. He would also not have to deal with like lawsuits and like shareholder voting control issues anymore. That's an issue with SpaceX, which they corrected with the SpaceX IP. I'm sorry, with Tesla, that they corrected with the SpaceX IPO. Elon has almost full control of SpaceX. I think it's like 85% voting control,
Right.
even though he only owns like 40 something percent of the shares. And so
Only.
he doesn't have that with Tesla. He only has, I think he owns like 12 or 13% of the Tesla shares, but has roughly like 18% of the voting control. It's vastly different. And so they wouldn't be subject to lawsuits or anything if they bring it under the SpaceX umbrella. And I think my guess is that'll happen. I don't know when. It probably wouldn't go through until next year, and maybe a vote by the end of this year. But really, it just comes down to what's the terms of the deal, and do Tesla investors view it as a fair deal? I think there's going to have to be probably a healthy premium for Tesla investors to feel like, okay, I'm going to vote for this. It's worth it. And it's also it's a huge hurdle because unlike the Elon Musk pay package votes, which only required 50% plus one vote of the people that showed up to vote, a merger vote would require 50% of all outstanding Tesla shares to vote in favor of it. And if anyone just doesn't even participate in the vote, it would be considered an abstention vote, which under Tesla's rules are counted as a no vote,
Well,
which is
Wow.
a huge bar to cross. So the terms of the deal are going to have to be good for Tesla investors, I think, to jump on board.
when they did the Elon pay package, what percentage? I know that they got 50 plus of the ones that voted, but do you know what percentage it was of all shares?
Uh, I don't remember what percentage was of all shares, but I know 73% of the shares that showed up, and I think most shares showed up. Um, but a lot of people abstained because they just either didn't vote or because they had issues with their international broker that doesn't allow them to vote. A lot of those issues have been started to be worked out in the last year or two, from pushing on the retail front. But Elon can vote himself in the merger vote, so that would equal roughly 20%. And then I think retail shareholders hold roughly a third, around 30% of all Tesla shares out there. So if you get Elon and all the retail voters on board, theoretically it would pass. But again, it's going to have to be good deal terms for people to say yes.
That makes sense. One other question, then I'll bring it back to you, Tanner. And this is, I just wanted to truly understand the numbers here. So Tesla, you became an investor in Tesla when it was what, $100 billion company? Maybe lower than
No,
that?
I first invested, I think it was a fall of 2015. So
Okay.
it was probably like 20 or 30 billion market cap.
20,
And
30
then I
billion
went
market
all
cap.
in 2018.
Okay. And what was it at 2018? 100 billion, maybe
No,
more?
probably like 75. I don't know, around there, maybe.
Sure. So you invested in a much, much lower than where it is today. You saw the vision, right? And wrote it up, and $1 trillion company. SpaceX not starting at a 75 or 50 or 100 billion, 2 trillion plus investing it in here. So when you look at the numbers, just being honest, like how bullish are you still on it? Is it where, because Tesla is maybe you looked at like, hey, I see a lot of growth here. SpaceX, could this truly 5x, 10x from here?
I I think, SpaceX is going to be the most valuable company in the world eventually. I think it has massive total addressable markets. I think the opportunity of just of a space economy is massive. And so I think a lot of people are balking at, almost a $2 trillion market cap, and comparing it to what's out there already. But I think if you have a long investment horizon, 5, 10 plus years, I think 1.75 trillion market cap is going to seem small in the future. We'll see. They really eventually they're just going to have to deliver on their goals. But it's funny to see a lot of people saying, based on the $1.75 trillion market cap, that it has like 100x multiple revenues multiple, but they're going off of last year's revenue, which was 18.7 billion, I think, when already since they announced their IPO, I think they've already tripled their annual revenue run rate with these Anthropic and Google compute lease deals. So I think by the end of this year, SpaceX could exit this year potentially at a 50 to 60 billion dollar annual revenue run rate, up from 18.7 last year, which is sizable. Granted, these compute lease deals have to stay in place, and Elon did warn that they're short-term deals. So we'll see. But I think SpaceX is just getting started. Starlink is adding over 20,000 new users a day still. And I think once those next generation Starlink and Starlink mobile satellites start to get going, that growth will explode even higher. And I think Starship is going to start launching payloads by the end of this year, is my guess. So once that happens, all kinds of new total addressable markets open up.
My only criticism with the growth on the revenue side, like you said, it's short term. So to look at it as like annual recurring revenue for specifically the Anthropic deal, because I think it's even shorter than the Google deal, is hard for me to do. But also, the reason why they got such a premium is because they have compute available. If they were to continue to build out new data centers, would they be able to get a 3x, market rate versus other companies that are providing bare metal? I don't see why they would, aside from just the rate in which they're building out data centers. On top of that, the reason why they have available compute is because XAI is not using that compute. So what is more valuable, selling compute or having a model that is a frontier model? How do you value that?
So I think right now Grok is definitely behind in terms of being in the competition rankings. I think that the Cursor deal is going to go through in the next month or two. I think they're going to execute on that. That'll be $60 billion. And I think they're at a 4 billion ARR right now, Cursor, up from 2 billion a couple months ago. I think they're going to use Cursor's data to try to become a leader in the coding space and the enterprise side. I think ultimately one of the biggest total addressable markets in the perspective was enterprise software. And so theoretically that would be part of the Cursor stuff. But I think Elon long-term does not want to be a lease compute or, compute lease provider. I think he would much prefer to have a leading AI model that people go to. And so I think that's his ultimate goal, which is why he's been like warning us, hey, these are just short-term lease deals for the compute, because I don't think he wants to help his competitors, for years to come, giving them capacity. I think he'd rather be able to use that capacity, but right now they don't need it for Grok. But I think maybe he feels like once they acquire Cursor, their capabilities improve, more people use their service, that they will start to use all the compute capacity that they have, and they'll cancel those compute lease deals. But we'll see. I think at least with the Google deal, that'll be in place until at least the end of Q1 next year. But I guess we'll see if they end up just building more data centers.
But yeah, I think just to the point though, whenever they do end up doing that, the revenue spike that we end up having will be used by the bears as a revenue decrease whenever they go back to using their own compute. And that'll come back in form of new customers paying for Grok or access to tokens or something, but it would be a slower ramp than unlocking 920 billion or billion plus dollar monthly contracts. So
it's a concern short term. I think long term is if they have a competitive model that is attracting a lot of certainly enterprise users, but also just the everyday users, I think it'll more than offset that loss from the compute lease deals. But it really is, it's a bet. Who knows what'll happen.
I have a couple. Sorry, Tanner.
No, you go ahead.
I have like a couple questions real quick. One, and sorry, it's a little bit tangential, but we had we were doing a podcast maybe about a year and a half ago, and we talked about SpaceX potentially going public. We did like a whole 45 minutes on it with Omar Sawyer, and you were pretty emphatic, and so was Omar, that SpaceX was not going to go public, that this would be a headache that Elon didn't want to have to deal with, and they, had all the access to funding that they needed, and it's easier to move when you're private. What do you think changed between then and now that led them to actually going public?
I think the orbital data centers really changed everything. Once they realized they needed, and just compute in general, I think once they realized they need a massive amount of compute and that they were going to acquire XAI, I think that sort of changed everything for them. SpaceX was always oversubscribed. They actually stopped raising money years ago. They only did secondaries for the last few years because they didn't actually need the money. Starlink was producing enough cash for them to be able to fund operations. But once they needed a ton of compute or money for compute, raising $75 billion in the private market is extremely difficult. I mean, maybe the demand still would have been there, but to do it over and over, just having access to public markets and the amount of liquidity there is just a much better scenario, I think, for them. And so I think that's really when things change. And Elon was like, I think we should go public. And don't underestimate his willingness to like open it up to retail investors. I think he hates just only having big institutional guys into his stock. Some retail have gotten in through, multi-layer SPVs or whatever, but not direct ownership. So I think he really just wanted to open up so the little guy could have a piece of this thing before the valuation started to get super crazy in the years to come.
Appreciate that. And then for investors, I know a lot of our audience had questions. I think you probably posted about this, but there were some people discussing S&P Dow Jones, fast track inclusion versus NASDAQ 100. You were posting a little bit about this. Maybe you can clarify for retail that was curious to understand it.
Yeah, so the S&P Dow Jones Indices was considering changing their rules to be able to fast track a lot of these mega cap IPOs or mega cap companies, which I think is any company over 100 billion or so. And the rules would have gotten rid of a 10% float requirement. Typically, you have to be profitable for 4 quarters straight to be able to be eligible, and then you gotta wait at least 12 months. So they were considering getting rid of the profitability metric, getting rid of the float thing, and then reducing the wait time from 12 months to 6 months. And based on their feedback that they got and just the decision that the S&P has made, because they have no financial interest in it, at least including SpaceX initially, like the NASDAQ did, they decided, no, we're not going to change our rules. We're going to stick to them how they are. And so at the earliest, SpaceX would be included in the S&P in late July, or sorry, in late June of next year. But again, they have to be profitable for 4 quarters. And if they're spending a lot on compute, they might not be net profitable. So I'm not sure how the S&P will look at it. Ultimately, it's just up to the S&P, and it's at their discretion, really, if a company is eligible. So things could change, I guess. But my guess is it's going to be a little while before we see that S&P inclusion.
But they'll be entered into the NASDAQ, correct? After 15 days?
Yeah, 15 days from today. Yep.
Yeah. I had one question, and I don't know, you let me know if you're the right person to ask. I'm not sure. But how do you do maintenance or keep GPUs online in orbit? There's faulty GPUs all the time, prongs bent out of shape. How do you do this?
Yeah, maintenance.
Miles away.
Yeah. So at least what Elon and today SpaceX President Gwen Shotwell said, the AI satellites are actually simpler than Starlink satellites are. The Starlink satellites have all these complex antennas and stuff. The AI satellites don't have that. And they have a lot of experience with satellites, having 10,500 of them in space. And they have been very reliable satellites. And so I think they feel they won't need to, maintain these things, or that they're going to have a lot of issues. I think that they feel that these things are going to be reliable, and that they can put, I think, like, they want to do over 1 million of them. I think they're at least 70 meters in wingspan. They're huge satellites. So I don't
Luckily,
think
we
they're
have a lot of
concerned.
space up there, right?
Yeah, a lot of space in space.
Yeah.
I don't think they feel there's going to be reliability problems, but they're the best engineers in the world. So if there are any issues that pop up, I have no doubt that they'll figure that out.
For those that are thinking, oh my gosh, we're putting more stuff out into space, like, how do you combat the talks about space junk? And then also, is there a point where there's too many satellites up there? Do they start getting a little close to each other? Like, how do we think about that?
Well, SpaceX actually developed a tracking system that's publicly available, so everyone can see where space stuff is in space, so that collisions don't happen. But the satellites also have anti-collision software, and they have little thrusters that can actually move the satellite slightly. A lot of people see these visualizations online of like so much space junk and all this trash around space, but it's blown up not to scale, right? Like, if you actually zoom out from Earth and look, you wouldn't even see a single piece of space junk. Like there's as Elon says, there's a lot of space in space. And so even if there's 1 million satellites and you were to zoom out from Earth, you're not going to see all these things floating around. The only way you see it is if, like, the sunlight reflects off of maybe one of the solar arrays. But really, I don't think it's an issue. They can deorbit them if they're faulty, or send them even out into deep orbit, so deep space, so they can just get rid of them if they need to. So I'm not worried about it.
I know
Seemingly that we still have a ton of land here on Earth, and yet space, like, if you just think of the sphere and go outwards, we've got more space out there.
Yeah.
I'm totally not worried about that at all. I think, it's an endless black abyss that we can throw solar panels into.
And actually, Impulse Space is, they're developing technology to be able to move satellites in space. So if there is junk or whatever, that theoretically they could move it out of the way.
Very cool. I know we're coming up here on the top of the hour. Do you have to run here? Do you have 10:15, or do you got to go?
I don't think it started trading yet.
No, we haven't started trading yet.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I can go for another 5 or so minutes.
Okay, cool. Well then, while you're still here, I just want to go a little bit further into this. The next steps, I think, for retail is, this is going to start trading. They're going to see some pretty heavy action, I would assume, right off the bat. I think you could see some significant moves as it starts to settle out a little bit. I think Tanner was hitting on some good pieces. Can you talk a little bit more as to the data that you're going to be most closely paying attention to as an investor over the course of this next year, as we start
You
getting
mean
public data?
in terms
Right?
of
We
the
start
share
getting
price or just like company
no, no,
data?
no. We start getting earnings calls. We start getting numbers, like data that we weren't exposed to before.
So my understanding is that SpaceX couldn't really talk much about the future of the company and their perspectives. And they had a quiet period all up until this IPO. My understanding is that probably starting around the Q2 earnings call, they can start talking more forward looking and talking about the future of the company and some of the metrics and data and goals that they want to accomplish. I think for now, maybe I don't know when the quiet period ends. I don't know if it's like on today or not, but I think ultimately everything comes down to Starship, as I was saying. Like, I just want as much information on that. It sounds like the 13th test flight will be next month, and they're not gonna try to go to orbit quite yet. But I think if that flight goes well, the flight after that, the test flight after that, they would try to catch the booster again, like they did a couple of years ago. And then maybe the one after that, they would potentially catch the ship as well, so the booster and the ship.
Well,
And then maybe by the end of this year, start launching actual cargo. But I don't really care so much on the development of the AI satellites. I know they'll figure that out. Ultimately, like Starship needs to work. So I think most investors will be curious about that. Terra Fab is still a ways off. I'm sure we'll hear announcements of it, but that's going to take a long time to build. Yeah.
I think the biggest thing for Elon skeptics is just the timeline, rather than the vision. Elon's never lacked vision. Do you think that there will ever be delays on some of the? I know we're looking forward to, I think, first data centers in space by, second half of 2026, if I'm correct. But
I think it was second half of next year because their Gigasat satellite facility that they announced a few days ago is going to start production, I think, at the end of next year. That's already started construction, but the actual production, I think, will start in the second half of next year.
But there is a major, there's something coming out of the second half of 2026. Am I correct? You know this way better than I do.
I think they said the first V3 Starlink satellites would start to launch at the end of this year.
Gotcha.
The V2, so there's the version 2 Starlink mobile satellites. That won't happen until the middle of next year. But the version 3 Starlink satellites for like residential and commercial, that will start, I think, at the end of this year, as long as Starship works.
And that's to unlock a gigabit per second of data, right?
Yeah, that'll unlock gigabit speeds.
And should SpaceX investors be cautious of potential delays at all for some of Elon's ambitions of SpaceX?
Oh, yeah, yeah. Like, as a Tesla investor, a longtime Tesla investor, I think we've all become used to delays. I think Elon says, like, he makes the impossible merely late. So I think we could expect the same probably with some of these SpaceX projects, especially going to Mars and, the Terra Fab project. But I think he will deliver eventually. Yeah, expect delays because these are very difficult problems to solve.
Yeah, that's fair.
all right. We just got a quick update, by the way. SpaceX is expected to now open at $162 per share. Originally, we heard 171, then 175, and now it is 162. That was just released, I think, a minute or two ago. So just a quick update there for the audience. And
do you have the valuation on that? I can do it here 1 second.
I believe it's around 2 trillion.
2.1, I think, is what I'm getting based on the 13.1 billion.
So that means they're doing a good job finding and balancing the buyers and sellers, and it's not going to get too crazy. It sounds like. I guess. Well, I mean, we'll see, but.
Also breaking news here. Cboe Global Markets expects to list SpaceX options as soon as Tuesday. So this would be one of the fastest option listings ever in history for a public market company. Basically, within 2-3 trading days, have option chain.
And I think those double leveraged ETFs that were supposed to go live today for SpaceX, SEC said, no, we don't want you going live today. Wait till Monday. So I think those go live.
I think that those will be live Monday. So you'll have, SPCH and some of the others that are going to be live.
By the way, I don't recommend people do that. The leverage things to me like that are crazy, but that's the market these days.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's for people that were going to trade options or things along those lines, anyways. You know, they
Yeah.
can trade with something with a little bit more control because I can only imagine what the option chain is going to look like for SpaceX
Oh
and
my
how
God.
that's going to move
It's
on Tuesday,
crazy.
Wednesday. I think you're going to have IV of hundreds of percent on these options right off the bat.
I'm curious to see how much retail buys today and into next week. Because based on what I mean, I only got 3% of what I asked for. I see a lot of other people got even less than that. So I'm curious how much retail demand there will be at these higher prices.
I didn't request that many shares. I requested 20 and I got filled on one. So
Now, on
yeah,
Robinhood,
Robinhood, yeah.
yeah. See, I should have asked for more on a different platform because I mean I was 830,000th to be allocated. I mean, there's probably over 1 million people that requested shares, so of course we were all going to get tiny amounts.
Evan requested 10 and got all 10.
Oh, nice. That's good.
He was like
They
45th or 45,000th though. He
no,
was
they
pretty
looked on the
early.
back and they
Yeah.
said, "Oh, it's stock market news." Okay. Yeah.
It is interesting that there was $350 billion in demand and SpaceX is just deliberately not raising more and that they didn't have a price range for the IPO. They just said, no, it's 135. We're not going to change that. That's super unusual, but it's interesting they chose that.
Yeah, they did just set their price right off the bat before even like roadshow or anything like that, right?
Yep. It sounds like it.
Pretty crazy. All right, I know that we've kept you to your
Yep.
time. I appreciate every time that we get with you. Sawyer, I think people should be following you very closely at Sawyer Merritt on Twitter. You're going to be providing updates, I would guess, throughout the day for anybody that is curious to continue to check them out. Any final comments, anything you want to put on retail's radar before you jump off here?
Not really. Just don't be stupid and don't create tons of margin, I guess. Just be smart and hot. I always say like don't chase a hot IPO all the time. There often are opportunities later to get in. That's not to say there will be, but this is such an unusual IPO that it's hard to say what will happen. But I think ultimately, long term, SpaceX will deliver on their vision, and just be prepared for crazy volatility in the coming weeks and months.
That would be my guess as well. Sawyer Merritt, always a pleasure having you on. We are looking
Thanks,
forward
guys.
to the next time we get to chat with you.
Great to meet
Appreciate
you,
it.
Sawyer.
You too. Take care.